So, welcome all. Day 7 book reading A New Earth. Chapter 3 The Core of Ego. Most people are so completely identified with the voice in the head, the incessant stream of involuntary and compulsive thinking, and the emotions that accompany it, that we may describe them as being possessed by their mind. As long as you are completely unaware of this, you take the thinker to be who you are. This is the egoic mind. We call it egoic because there is a sense of self, of I. Ego in every thought, every memory, every interpretation, opinion, viewpoint, reaction, emotion. This is unconsciousness, spiritually speaking. Your thinking, the content of your mind, is of course conditioned by the past, your upbringing, culture, family, background, and so on. The central core of all your mind activity consists of certain repetitive and persistent thoughts, emotions, and reactive patterns that you identify with most strongly. This entity is the ego itself. In most cases, when you say I, it is the ego speaking, not you, as we have seen. It consists of thought and emotion, of a bundle of memories you identify with as me and my story, of habitual roles you play without knowing it, of collective identifications such as nationality, religion, race, social class, or political allegiance. It also contains personal identifications not only with possessions but also with opinions, external appearance, long standing resentments, or concepts of yourself as better than or not as good as others, as a success or failure. The content of the ego varies from person to person, but in every ego, the same structure operates. In other words, ego only differs on the surface. Deep down, they are all the same. In what way are they the same? They live on identification and separation. When you live through the mind made self, comprised of thought and emotion, that is the ego. The basis for your identity is precarious because thought and emotions are, by their very nature, ephemeral, fleeting. So every ego is continuously struggling for survival, trying to protect and enlarge itself. To uphold the I thought, it needs the opposite thought of the other. The conceptual I cannot survive without the conceptual other. The others are most other when I see them as my enemies. At one end of the scale of this unconscious egoic pattern lies the egoic compulsive habit of fault finding and complaining about others. Jesus referred to it when he said, "Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye?" At the other end of the scale, there is physical violence between individuals and warfare between nations. In the Bible, Jesus' question remains unanswered, but the answer is, of course, because when I criticize or condemn others, it makes me feel bigger, superior. So what is the core of ego, or what actually gives rise to that egoistic part of the mind? So that we are all aware that there is a voice in our head, which is a constant chatterbox at the back of our mind, back of the head. Till time, if we remain unaware of the fact कि ये जो वॉइस मैं सुन रहा हूं बार बार लगातार सारा टाइम, ये तो मेरी है ही नहीं. To put it, before this thought comes into our awareness that this voice in my head does not belong to me, there comes a stage where we all have been through, and we probably still are there at a lot of times of our day-to-day lives, becoming unaware of the fact कि ये जो voice है मेरे अंदर जो चल रही है is not me. But when we are unaware of this actual reality, what we end up doing is we end up in a state where we affirm it to ourselves that this voice is my voice. ये तो मेरी voice है. So whatever this voice is saying, that's me saying. So that's the attachment, and that's the relationship we as an individual make with that voice in our head, and are completely and fully identified with this voice as this is who I truly am. और इसी में हमारी सारी जिंदगी चलती रहती है, where we are associated and attached to this voice in our at the back of the head, and are very clear and firm that this is my voice. So ये जो बोल रहा है ये तो मैं ही बोल रहा हूं. When this fact or this illusion becomes our own reality, of accepting this illusion of being identified with the voice in our head as my own voice, that gives the importance to the mind. Because then the mind starts thinking and has also established the fact that this person and me, we are the same. That importance given to the mind, that you are me, I am identified with you as myself, and that's the attachment we have, and that's the kind of importance that I'm going to give you as I'm going to give my own, because you and me are the same. वहां पे ईगो का what you say birth होता है, जन्म होता है, start होता है, and that's it's from the basic concept of your identification with that voice in your head as yours. Whereas basic reality जो हमें हर एक इंसान को पता है कि if I can hear something, for example, I'm just listening to something on the radio, okay, but I'm not speaking, because my speech verbally would be through my through my mouth, through my lips, through this vocal cord. That's my speech. Like I'm speaking and you guys are listening. Okay. That's the similar way when we listen to that voice at the back of our head, it's a very clear indication that there is a second party who is speaking. Similar to when you are listening to a conversation or a song on the radio, when you are not speaking, but you are listening. And exactly similar to all present here in the class who are not speaking but listening to my voice. That establishes a fact which is very important for all of us to realize, that if I, as an individual, am aware that I'm listening to that voice in my head, that establishes me as the listener, not the speaker. Because अगर रेडियो पर कोई बोल रहा है तो we are not speaking, we are listening. Similar, इस क्लास में अगर मैं बोल रहा हूँ for this current period of time, so you are not speaking, you guys are listening. Similarly, when there is that tape going on at the back of your head, you as an individual are aware that you are listening to that voice, and that gives a question, whose voice? अगर मैं लिसनर हूं और ये जो मेरे बैक ऑफ द माइंड में आवाज चल रही है, आई एम अवेयर दैट आई एम लिसनिंग टू दिस वॉइस, देन whose voice is this? That is the voice of your mind. So there is an established fact being made here. Is the one who is speaking, whose voice is there at the back of your mind, back of your head, is your mind's voice. And you, as an individual, as an empowered soul, is now aware that I am listening to my mind. और जब ये फैक्ट हम एस्टैब्लिश करते हैं, that's the first jolt or hit on the egoic part of the mind where it does not know what to do. So it will keep creating hallucinations. No, this is your voice. You are just trying to confuse yourself. This fellow speaker is trying to confuse you. Do not listen to him. This is your voice. You are in control. You need to understand that. N number of things the ego will do. Uncountable things the ego will do. But one very clear logic. If you are listening and not speaking, that means there is another speaker. And you are aware that you are listening to that speaker. And nobody can change this fact. It's a very logical fact where everybody would be with me on that. So जब हम ये concept mind के साथ बात करते हैं, because a lot of times there is a conversation happening in which you are also speaking and the mind is also speaking. So it's like the mind is saying, don't listen to him. He's not making sense. He's trying to confuse you. There is an internal reply where you are aware that you are also speaking. And that internal thought speech of yours to your mind is, just shut up. Let me see what makes sense. That also happens. But yes, you will only get to that state the time you start becoming more aware. And that awareness, the first step of that awareness has to be when you establish this fact that the voice in your head is not yours, and that the voice in your head is the voice of your mind, And that establishes a very important fact that you and your mind are not the same. They are two separate identities operating probably for the same purpose. That shadows the egoistic part of the mind. Because believe you me, mind is important. We need the mind. A lot of people, in spirituality, the mind is the negative word. It's only when you're talking about the negative aspect of the mind is the egoistic part of the mind. Other than that, we need the mind. We can't go without the mind because we won't be able to make logical sense of what is happening around. It's with your mind that you're aware that there is a language that we need to speak. It's with your mind that you're aware that there are words in the language which have a specific meaning. So the mind is important. It is only when you give that mind too much importance that gives rise to that egoistic part of the mind where there is an issue. But as such, the mind, yes, it's required. You can't do without your mind. You need it. That's why you get it. When you come here, you have a mind and you have a body. The two very important aspects of your journey here on this school of earth. So yes, the mind is required. It's only that we should be very, very cautiously aware that we should not let the ego predominate our actions for any kind of an attention seeking issue, or any kind of a emotional enhancement or whatever. That is all what we need to be aware, that when we listen to this voice at the back of the head, it's the voice of the mind. And me and my mind are two separate identities. Only the recognition, or bringing it into your awareness that you and your mind are not the same, actually starts to bring about the shift of what we are talking about, a higher realm of consciousness, what is being referred to in this book and in spirituality, known and referred to as the new earth, where we are going to be ascending towards that higher realm of consciousness. And in order to enhance that, the first getaway is to be aware that you and your mind are two separate identities, and it is the egoic part of the mind that I need to work on, and the other part of the mind is important and it is required. Complaining and resentment. Complaining is one of the ego's favorite strategies for strengthening itself. Every complaint is a little story the mind makes up that you completely believe in. Whether you complain aloud, only in thought, makes no difference. Some egos that perhaps don't have much else to identify with easily survive on complaining alone. When you are in the grip of such an ego, complaining, especially about other people, is habitual and, of course, unconscious, which means you don't know what you're doing. Applying negative mental labels to people, either to their face or more commonly, when you speak about them to others or even just think about them, is often part of this pattern. Name calling is the crudest form of such labeling and of the ego's need to be right and triumph over others. Jerk, bastard, bitch, all definitive pronouncements that you can't argue with. On the next level down, on the scale of unconsciousness, you have shouting and screaming, and not much below that, physical violence. Resentment is the emotion that goes with complaining and the mental labeling of people and adds even more energy to the ego. Resentment means to feel bitter. indignant, grieved, or offended. You resent other people's greed, their dishonesty, their lack of integrity, what they are doing, what they did in the past, what they said, what they failed to do, what they shouldn't have done. The ego loves it. Instead of overlooking unconsciousness in others, you make it into their identity. Who is doing that? The unconsciousness in you, the ego. Sometimes the fault that you perceive in another isn't even there. It is a total misinterpretation, a projection by a mind conditioned to see enemies and to make itself right or superior. At other times, the fault may be theirs, but by focusing on it, sometimes to the exclusion of everything else, you amplify it, and what you react to in another, you strengthen in yourself. Non reaction of the ego in others is one of the most effective ways, not only of going beyond ego in yourself, but also of dissolving the collective human ego. But you can only be in a state of non reaction if you can recognize someone's behavior as coming from the ego, as being an expression to the collective human dysfunction. When you realize it's not personal, there is no longer a compulsion to react as if it were. By not reacting to the ego, you will often be able to bring out the sanity in others, which is the unconditioned consciousness as opposed to the conditioned. At times, you may have to take practical steps to protect yourself from deeply unconscious people. This you can do without making them into enemies. Your greatest protection, however, is being conscious. Somebody becomes an enemy if you personalize the unconsciousness, that is the ego. Non reaction is not weakness but strength. I repeat, non reaction is not weakness but strength. Another word for non reaction is forgiveness. To forgive is to overlook, or rather to look through. You look through the ego to the sanity that is in every human being as his or her essence. So जब हम core of the ego को detailed में समझने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं, so it's two factors which really play a major role when it comes to operating from the premise of your own ego is when we are seeing ourselves as complaining all the time. What exactly do we mean when we are complaining? We are just trying to put the blame on something which is external to me rather than taking the responsibility and acknowledging what is in your space, which is there for your best and highest interest. I'll come back, I'll speak in more details on it. On the other hand, complaining के साथ साथ जब हम resent करते हैं और हम we start labeling the other person. इसने तो ऐसे करा, इसने तो ये किया, ये तो ऐसे है, and you come into that zone where you are like, yeah, पता नहीं मैं, why am I like this? Why are things happening to me like this? So you become in a very in a different mode, I would say. So complaining or resentment से हम करने की क्या कोशिश कर रहे हैं basically? If we ask ourselves, what is it that we are trying to achieve when we are complaining or when we are being resentful about a person, situation, or an event? What is it that we are trying to do? We are trying to operate from a premise of our ego in which you are shifting that blame onto something else, some other person, some other situation, some other event, some other circumstances, so that you are able to get to that state and live your life with that very, very dear to you box of excuses and be in that complacent zone where anything and everything that is happening in your life, you are not at fault. It is only because of others that you are there. And that is, trust me, the biggest lie. That's the biggest illusion you can ever be on this planet when you are operating from, from that premise of complaining, from that premise of resenting things. That's not reality. That's an illusion of your egoistic mind, which is not real. Because at the end of the day, whatever is outside of you, any experience, any situation, any circumstances, any other person's uh, way of being will not make sense to you the way they are doing it. I repeat, whatever the other person says to you will not make the sense the way they are doing it, but it will always make sense to the way you want to perceive it. So whatever is outside of you, that's always neutral. But the meaning you give to it, or the way that external thing lands on you, and that meaning which you give to it, that shapes your entire way of being. For example,
Arjun, can I ask you for an example? Like, can I?
I was just saying, for example,
Okay, okay, carry on.
for example, मैं, as an individual, for the purpose of this example, I am speaking to say, an employee of mine, and तेरे को काम नहीं करना था. What did we perceive? I am angry. Why? Because हमारे मेमोरी में इसको हमने एंगर के साथ एसोसिएट किया हुआ है. My reaction, the way I spoke, is perceived I am angry. Similarly, if I'm using the same words, तेरे को काम नहीं करना आता है, is a humor. I have not changed the words. I have just changed the way I am stating things. So, what is it that we need to learn here? Is it that the words are important, or is it that the expression is important? What is more important? मैंने चीज एक ही चीज बोली, तेरे को काम नहीं करना आता, in a tone where I was very angry, because what has been learned as angry, and एक tone, तेरे को काम नहीं करना आता, where I am trying to mock at the other person or being slightly sarcastic humorously. Did I change the word? Was there a change of words? No.
Oh.
But in both the situations, the way we have been conditioned by our past, one was an angry person, one was a mocking, humorous person. But reality में if we need to go beyond our perception, is we need to see what was said. मैं जिस मर्जी स्टाइल से बोलूं. For example, if I am saying this similar thing to you as an individual, because you are, for example, supposedly working in my office. If it's the angry version of what I said, तेरे को काम नहीं करना आता है, there is a slight offense in everybody. Okay? But if the similar way said, तेरे को काम नहीं करना आता है, that offensiveness is not there. Why? And ये तो अभी एक एक्सटर्नल बंदा की आप सिचुएशन चूज कर रहे हो. Now, when we talk about our day-to-day life examples, where we have our close relations, close people whom we interact, who have a special place, there's a close relationship. When they start playing this, तेरे को काम नहीं करना आता, in an angry tone, और तेरे को काम नहीं करना आता in a humorous tone, the impact is much more than what it is from an outsider. Yes or no?
Yeah, that's true. But why is that? Why is that?
Because your association of the perception of the mind is like that. Because the way we have been conditioned is that being angry is not okay. But if that emotion exists, that means उसमें भी कुछ use होगा. So when I as an individual who is coming from a premise of being emotionally aware कि ये मेरे ego को hit कर रहा है, how dare he scream at me, I need to actually sit down and say what part of me is attracting this anger. That's the first question you need to ask yourself. Rather than reacting, it is to absorb. The other person is behaving in an angry manner, I get that. But what part of me is attracting this? What is it that I need to learn? होता क्या है as an individual? You form an opinion. He's always angry with me. पता नहीं क्या हो गया यार इसको. सुबह क्या खा के आया था यार, मतलब कुछ भी मेरी गलती है भी नहीं. Because it's very rare to find individuals say हाँ नहीं मेरी तो गलती है. Okay? Because as an individual, the ego gives us this righteousness, this superiority that we are always right. That's the beauty of ego. The ego never says you're wrong. As per the ego, you're always right. Because it is your ego. But when it's a conversation between two people, there are two egos at play. So the other person's ego is also going to say, Beta, you're right. It's your ego. So what we need to incorporate is, first, we should try not to react in that situation, because a reaction followed by a reaction is not very pleasant, will never be, because we are now talking and trying to incorporate and see the different faces, different cores, different types, or different parts of the egoistic aspect of our mind. We are now in a situation where we are more aware of where is this coming from. So if this is coming in my space, first I should avoid not to react. Second, I should try to analyze what is it inside of me that is getting triggered by this anger, and then accordingly work with it. So there's a huge process to it. But what we're talking about right now is you need to identify that yes, it is being triggered. If anything that is external to you, if it's being triggered inside of you, that trigger is not you. That trigger part of is your egoistic part of the mind, because that is the part which is perceiving it because of that conditioning, because of that past experiences, conditioning, programming. Because as a true soul, your innate sense is happiness and love, and which is truly unconditional. It is only your identification with your mind, with your egoistic part of the mind, that you feel this is being triggered, and it's like a harm to you. It has no, it's not a harm to you. It's just in your space for a certain reason, for a certain purpose, which you as an empowered individual, you as an empowered soul, need to find out. और होता क्या है रियलिटी में? रिएक्शन. तूने ऐसे किया, ले भाई, मेरे पास भी ईगो है, मेरे पास भी माइंड है, मैं बताता हूं तेरे को. And that's how all the rifts go from, small small things, and it has no end. For example, I'll give you one more example. All of you in our childhood have been hit. Okay. So we are of that generation where hitting by parents, by teachers was acceptable. Yes or no? Show of hands, guys. I can't see the cameras.
Yes.
Okay. So we have been hit by our teachers, parents, or somebody elders. अगर ज्यादा नहीं तो एक दो बार तो हुआ ही हुआ है. Okay. Do you think that physical sensation of that थप्पड़, जब भी वो पड़ा, जिस भी एज में पड़ा, उसका कितना इम्पैक्ट रहा होगा? 5 मिनट, 10 मिनट, 15 मिनट, बहुत जोर से लगी हो तो आधा घंटा, 1 घंटा, खुद ना खास्ता दांत टूट गया हो तो 4-5 दिन तो लगेंगे, या हफ्ता भी लग जाएगा, but not more than that. So the physical sensation of that physical abuse done to you X number of years back, completely vanished into a maximum period of, say, some hours to a few days. But do you think that emotional impact of that physical abuse which happened to you during your childhood by your elders or your teachers is still there? फिजिकली वैनिश्ड हो चुका है वो, कुछ घंटों में खत्म हो गया था, कुछ दिनों में खत्म हो गया होगा, मैक्सिमम टू मैक्सिमम. बट इमोशनली आज भी हम उस चीज को अपने एक्सपीरियंस में बार बार टेप को रिप्ले कर रहे हैं. मम्मी ने एक बार मारा था, या मम्मी ने बहुत मारा था, पापा ने बहुत मारा था, टीचर तो वो टीचर का पर्टिकुलर नाम भी याद होगा जिसने बहुत मारा था. भाई मारा था, फिजिकल इम्पैक्ट हुआ, वो खत्म हो चुका है. दैट फिजिकल इम्पैक्ट ऑन योर बॉडी is no more there. It vanished so and so many years back. Why are we still fixated on that? Because the ego does not want to let go of it. Because in that scenario, you became the weak one, and somebody else became the superior one. So the ego does not want to let go of that physical abuse which happened so many years back, जिसका फिजिकल इम्पैक्ट कुछ घंटे या कुछ दिनों में खत्म हो गया था, आफ्टर सो मेनी इयर्स, आज भी अपने दिमाग में रख के बैठे. बिकॉज द ईगो लाइक्स टू रिमेंबर दीज थिंग्स, एंड द बेस्ट पार्ट, वो स्टोर करके रखता है कि फ्यूचर में कोई ऐसा सिमिलर इंस्टेंस निकल के आएगा तो उसको मेरे को इसके साथ इक्वेट करके इसको और पक्का करना है, कि ये सोल ना एम्पावर हो जाए और इसको समझ ना आ जाए कि भैया फिजिकल इम्पैक्ट तो खत्म हो चुका है, तो क्यों अपना रायता फैला के इतनी देर से उसको रख के बैठा हुआ है. It's time for you to let go, man. The physical impact was there. It was there for you to learn something. Probably you were misbehaving. You were not aware that what you were doing. Just let it go. It was long ago. But no, I want to hold on to it because I love to complain. अगर मेरे पास कुछ कंप्लेन करने को नहीं होगा तो मैं करूंगा क्या? That's how it operates. And I couldn't have timed it better. The ego loves to complain and feel resentful, not only about other people, but also about situations. What you can do to a person, you can also do it to a situation. Make it into an enemy. The implication is always this should not be happening. I don't want to be there. I don't want to be doing this. I am being treated unfairly. And the ego's greatest enemy of all is, of course, the present moments, which is to say, life itself. Complaining is not to be confused with informing someone of a mistake or deficiency so that it can be put right. And to refrain from complaining doesn't necessarily mean putting up with bad quality or behavior. There is no ego in telling the waiter that your soup is cold and needs to be heated up. If you stick to the facts, which are always neutral, how dare you serve me cold soup? That's complaining. There is a me here that loves to feel personally offended by the cold soup and is going to make the most of it as me. It a me that enjoys making someone wrong. The complaining we are talking about is in the service of the ego, not of change. Sometimes it becomes obvious that the ego doesn't really want change so that it can go on complaining. See if you can catch this, that is to say, notice the voice in the head, perhaps in the very moment it complains about something, and recognize it for what it is, the voice of the ego, no more than a conditioned mind pattern, a thought. Whenever you notice that voice, you will also realize that you are not the voice, but the one who is aware of it. In fact, you are the awareness that is aware of the voice. In the background, there is the awareness. In the foreground, there is the voice, the thinker. In this way, you are becoming free of the ego, free of the unobserved mind. The moment you become aware of the ego in you, it is strictly speaking no longer the ego, but an old conditioned mind pattern. Ego implies unawareness. Awareness and ego cannot coexist. The old mind pattern or mental habit may still survive and reoccur for a while because it has the momentum of thousands of years of collective human unconsciousness behind him. But every time it is recognized, it is weakened.